My name is Sébastien Pérouse. I'm the director of the Central Asia program here at George Washington University. So welcome to the Central Asia program seminars. It's really my great pleasure to welcome all of you today to this event on Central Asia Reconnected, regional integration in a shifting geopolitical landscape. Again, thank you for being with us. We really gather here today, I guess, at a moment of profound change. I mean, globally, regionally, uh, and within also the 5 Central Asian states. And we see that the international order is being tested in multiple directions. And of course, the war in Ukraine, which has withdrawn geopolitical fault lines in Eurasia, China's political ambitions, which continue to expand, and Russia, which is recalibrating its posture in response to both internal challenges and external pressures. And these developments are having, of course, far-reaching consequences, and not least for all the countries of Central Asia. But rather than being passive observers, all the Central Asian states are stepping forward to shape their future together. And over the past few years, we have seen the emergence, I think, of a more assertive and cohesive regional vision. Leaders in the region are increasingly engaging in dialogue. They have signed, for example, historical border demarcation agreements. They collaborate more on energy, on water, on transport corridors, and they work to enhance their collective voice on the global stage. And we are also seeing how Central Asia is attempting to balance its relationship with major powers, of course, with China, with Russia, but it's also seeking to diversify its partnership with the European Union, the United States, Turkey, South Korea, and the Gulf states. And Central Asia, as you certainly know, has 9 active C5+1 formats, including with China, with Russia, with the United States, with the European Union, which reflect an intensifying interest in Central Asia as a coherent, interconnected bloc. But this cooperation actually is not only, I would say, geopolitically motivated. It's also rooted in cultural ties and also in economic interdependence. And there is a growing sense among Central Asians themselves that regionalism is not a foreign imposed idea, but rather a homegrown strategy for resilience, development, and identity building in what we could call, I guess, a volatile world now. I mean, of course, all of that is not without tensions. I mean, there's still real competition among the 5 states, whether for, let's say, for investments, for transit routes, or for influence. And there are, of course, diverging national priorities and even institutional capacities and different foreign policy trajectories. But what is really remarkable is that despite these differences, there is a sustained effort to find common ground. Some have even begun to speak of a Central Asian renaissance, so a vision of the region not as a periphery of great power competition, but as a center of connectivity, creativity, and cooperation. So now, whether this idea can be realized depends not only on visionary rhetoric, but on concrete actions, improving governance, addressing socio-economic inequalities, and investing in the infrastructure, both physical and institutional, that can really sustain deeper integration. So today, we will explore the key drivers of regionalism in Central Asia. We will assess, I guess, the tangible outcomes of integration efforts so far. And we probably ask also some harder questions. What obstacles remain, for example? What role should external actors play? And what kind of regionalism is truly sustainable in the long run? And so before we start, I want to say that this event today is based on an important new report, which is titled United We Stand, Central Asian Unity, the Way Forward, which authored by our first speaker, Ms. Aytolkin Kurmanova. This report will be published very soon. It will be freely downloadable in the coming days on our Central Asia Program website. And you will see that this report really offers a very thoughtful and forward-looking analysis of how and why regional integration is accelerating in Central Asia, and we're really happy to use it as a starting point for today's conversation. And besides Aytolkin Kurmanova, who's going to be the first speaker and present the findings of a report, we are very fortunate to have with us today two excellent speakers, experts on the region, who will help us unpack this regional dynamics. We'll have Dr. Margarita Sienova and Dr. Wesley here. For our online audience, I want to specify that after our speaker's presentation, we will have, of course, a Q&A session. So please feel free to send your questions in the chat box. And finally, before we begin, I would also like to thank the International Tax and Investment Center for managing this project, which includes the preparation of this report and the organization of several conferences to present it. I would also like to thank Dr. Ariel Cohen, Dr. Wesley Hill, and Mr. Quinn Buckley from the IT for the support of this event and for this excellent opportunity for cooperation they have offered us here at the CAP. So now let's get started. Again, we're going to start with Ms. Aytolkin Kurmanova, who is a specialist in economic policy in Central Asia. She has authored several studies on regional economic cooperation, trade, commodity, and financial markets. She holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from Al Farabi Kazakh National University and an executive MBA from HEC Paris. And as a multimedia and creative editor of multilingual platforms, Aytolkin has produced and directed analytical content on Eurasia and Central Asia in Russian, English, and Uzbek languages. So again, thank you all for being with us today. And Aytolkin, the floor is yours. Yes.
Thank you very much again, Sebastian. It's really a pleasure to be here back at Central Asia Program, which is also kind of my home. I worked here for 10 years, and I agree with you, Sebastian. Really, the discussions surrounding regional cooperation in Central Asia is always kind of a difficult one because there are so many contrasting opinions. Somebody is very optimistic, somebody is very skeptical. As you say, I look forward to the hard questions. But, you know, I wanted to start with 2013 when I was a fellow here at the Central Asia Program, and I wrote a fellowship paper on this very subject. And I remember that there were really a lot of debates, and there was much more skepticism, you know, surrounding the discussion that we are having today, and especially the viability of a political union in Central Asia. And as you said about the obstacles, and I remember the list of the obstacles back then was really a very long one, and nobody was really kind of talking about the opportunities, and rightly so, because, you know, I think that a lot of skepticism back then was probably caused by the fact that there was this first project of political integration in Central Asia back in the 1990s, which failed. And I think that, you know, if somebody doesn't know, that was back in the 1990s when the post-Soviet Central Asian republics quickly, or maybe even too quickly, proposed this project and spent the whole decade kind of designing different institutions, you know, even the Central Asian Parliament, Central Asian Defense Council, and things like that. But unfortunately, they didn't really that project didn't really pick up after the 2000s, and there are many reasons for that. Most people think, and probably they are right, saying that this is because of the Russia factor and the Russian interference, but I think it's also mostly the economic conditions of those times, because I think that by the first decade of the 90s and the 2000s were really a good time for Central Asian countries, because it was the commodity boom, the China was rising, there was a lot of demand for the natural resources, and this kind of increase in financial flows, they kind of reduced incentives for cooperation. And everybody was talking back then only about national building and the identity and sovereignty, security, and things like that. And also, but by that time, also by 2013, again, the time that I remember very well, I think the region was about to enter the kind of a new Eurasian era, and that was driven by a very confident and assertive Russia back then. And it was also in the aftermath of the global financial crisis that Central Asian countries were kind of disappointed maybe with globalization, and they began shifting their focus towards regionalism, but outside of their borders, unfortunately. And in this picture, Russia, very powerful Russia, offering a very good economic incentives, kind of economic pool through free trade and access to its labor market, capital market, investment. It really emerged as a powerful and dominant partner, even surpassing China in some sense, because it offered the Central Asian countries some kind of connection to Europe. And back then, Eurasianism was often transcribed as Europe, Russia, and Asia. So it was a little bit more inclusive rather than later. And yes, and the Eurasian Union, which was set up as a customs union between Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus, was really a promising geopolitical project with almost certain expansion throughout the post-Soviet space. And when Kyrgyzstan, we remember when Kyrgyzstan joined the project in 2014, everybody was kind of expecting that Tajikistan and even Uzbekistan might follow maybe as associate members, but still. And so that would mean that the Central Asian kind of cooperation would be kind of supplanted by this greater Eurasia project. But not so much, because we saw that, things started to change. And already after 2014, we see many changes actually starting in 2013 and 2014. And usually this current chapter of the Central Asian cooperation that we're facing today, we usually trace it back to 2016, 2018. And this is the time when there is a new Uzbekistan president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who was very active and proposing regional cooperation in Central Asia right from the start. But it was also a timely moment for Central Asian countries to kind of revive their regional dialogue that was interrupted back when the Soviet Union broke down. So in this phase, I think that opened up, with the arrival of Shavkat Mirziyoyev, I think that there were some other factors beyond just the Uzbekistan leadership transition. There were larger economic and geopolitical concerns. And I think that, again, economic factors were kind of decisive here. We saw the commodity boom ending, and that left the regional natural resources kind of rather heavily exploited. And we saw that neither liberal economic practices of Kazakhstan nor kind of more strict industrial policy of Uzbekistan had proven to kind of provide an alternative for the natural resources, for the exports of the natural resources. And of course, Russian factors again. There was a Russian aggression in Crimea in 2014, and even though the countries of Central Asia, they continue to be very cautiously and kind of gradually rebalancing their policy and balancing out the Russia-led organizations, we see a lot of diversification that started from that time. And also in 2013, I think that the Central Asian countries, they kind of saw the contours of the new, of the great power competition with China proposing the Belt and Road Initiative, and Chinese leader famously proposing that in Kazakhstan specifically. So I think that, yes, this is kind of the new chapter of the regional cooperation that we're currently living in. And a lot of work has been done during this past decade. And as you said, Sebastian, yeah, we call the Central Asian Renaissance, but this is what the actually Kazakh president Kassym-Jomart Tokayev calls the current cooperation in Central Asia. And there are many really good things that have been done, you know, since that time. The countries met in various formats, various settings. We saw, as you say, as you said, the historical agreements between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan that was signed in this March. And President Mirziyoyev, again, is very active in this field. He is calling this a new regional identity, a Central Asia with one past and a common future. But I think that still this pace of regional cooperation is still not quite satisfying for real, you know, real political project, the real project of political integration. And what analysts usually call it is a functionalist approach that Central Asia countries, they chose. They kind of think that this is a multi-step and a complex process where you can start really very slow and gradually. So the presidents, for example, of Central Asian countries, they call their meetings strictly consultative. They cooperate really in selected areas, and they don't really go further than that. And this is a kind of cooperation where they can maintain their differences and their unique identities while kind of cooperating in some fields. And yes, we agree that all Central Asian countries are different. Every country has different resources, different history, maybe at some sense. There is a lot of competition also. And not every country in the region also directly benefits from the transportation projects between China and Europe. This is also true. And that's why I think that even though we have been discussing regional cooperation in optimistic terms over the last decade and praising every opportunity that 5 presidents would, for example, pose for the photo, I think that the prospect of a political union is really remains as distant as ever. And but at the same time, in this report, we turn to the historical significance of Central Asian connectivity. And we try to see, because, you know, whenever we talk about Central Asia, we always say about its history and culture, how it's bound the peoples and the nations of Central Asia together, how there is this paradox of diversity and commonality. But at the same time, in the history, Central Asia was never a unified political state. It was always, you know, there were just some flexible federal confederations, tribal confederations. There were military alliances, but in most parts, Central Asia was also, you know, of course, the part of the large empires. And it often disintegrated due to internal rivalries, not really the external factors. And so in this report, we thought that this is kind of worth remembering, that what brought together Central Asia was really the economic benefits from the joint production, joint consumption, and trade that we call today as the Silk Roads. And this is really a very unique economic phenomenon that I don't think that existed in any other region. And whenever we say Silk Roads, we always remember Central Asia. And that phenomenon really lasted for 2,000 years, and that from Scythians to Mongols. And many historians think that the Silk Road ended with Russia and China signing a direct trade deal in Derchinsk and Kyakhta in the late 17th century. And this is when Russia and China could trade finally without any intermediaries. But actually, some trade still existed. And, you know, I've read somewhere that there was a lot of trade through Central Asia territories, even in the 19th century when Russia traded with India, using its colonized Central Asian territories. So the Silk Road, in some sense, is the force that is such a great force of economic integration that it can never die. And I think that what we also wrote in this report and kind of made it clear that it is the idea of the popular imagination. It is an idea tightly connected to common prosperity and unity in Central Asia. So, and there are actually various interpretations of Central Asian connectivity. We'll also go through in the report Pax Turanica, Pax Mongolica, Pan-Turkism, Turkestan, Greater Central Asia, or Eurasianism. And so we, excuse me, I need some water. And so all of these ideas are really interesting because we see that in the history they have been sometimes twisted, sometimes changed, and sometimes broadened, but the core had remained probably the same. So in this report, we also analyze a lot the current situation, what is going on today, how significant is the integration agenda for the people and for the elites of the region? Is the integration process is really bottom up or top down? And in many cases, we see that it's actually the elites that are supporting this historical narrative, sometimes for their own legitimization. But of course, a large question is, if there is a political union in Central Asia, what kind of a form should it take? And we already see a lot of discussions on that. We see that it's, if there will be a political union in Central Asia, it probably will be built around the connectivity, namely various transportation projects that are currently funded by both China and European Union. We see that the countries in the region are building some value chains in the region, the boosting border communities, and the trade, intra-regional trade is finally increasing. Still, there are a lot to be done. Markets are very protective of their producers and consumers, and the borders are not that efficient. And it seems that there is still, everything is kind of stuck because there is no comprehensive economic agreement that could be endorsed by all countries, or there should be some common authority probably to deal with all this harmonization of tariffs, of customs, of border regulation, and so on. So one of the ways that in this report we thought would be kind of a practical way to implement the project is to focus really on the inter-regional trade instead of dealing with the protectionism of intra-regional trade. So, for example, if there is a kind of a single approach to transit fees, the region could build some joint fund for road reconstruction or road infrastructure development. And that's actually what's the example of the ASEAN, because the ASEAN countries, they also don't trade with each other so much. They trade with external powers like China or Europe. And so by kind of shifting the focus from all this, internal bureaucracies, the policymakers in the region could probably achieve something more quick and more efficiently. And another strategy that we thought it's also interesting is to focus also on the road construction and on the road infrastructure, and because the railway connections in Central Asia are very different, and with Chinese, for example. And in this way, this approach even mirrors the transportation model here in the United States, where we see, that the trucking industry really forms the backbone of freight logistics, and particularly in the areas here in the United States where the rail connectivity is really limited. And so maybe some, professional truck drivers or some companies, truck companies in Central Asia could do the same, and this would be a very interesting and adaptive approach, especially given that many truck drivers in the United States actually immigrants from Central Asia too. So I think, this current momentum is presenting really many options, many opportunities, and especially as as we know that Russia's war in Ukraine has really redefined trade routes in Eurasia. So the main idea is that the Central Asian countries should really be looking into building their own belts, their own inclusive transportation corridors, not only not only aligning themselves along one single route between China and Europe. We should really develop a more comprehensive kind of an inclusive network of roads in Central Asia. And the ancient Silk Road is a kind of interesting source of ideas, especially for modern economic strategies. And we don't know how it works. We don't know, what was the volume of the trade, but we know that it was a very wealthy project, and it stayed successful even when big empires like Persia, Rome faded away. And at some point, Central Asians even managed to challenge China's monopoly on making silk and paper. So yes, being landlocked and missing out on industrial growth for decades might seem like big setbacks for Central Asia. And also we lost a lot of skilled workers, a lot of human capital migration, which also didn't help. But, and maybe some people would say that, turning the region into a transit hub, it's not like the flashiest idea of all, especially in the age of technology and but I think it's practical. It could lead to a lot of benefits. It has a really great spillover effect, like creating jobs and boosting other parts of the economy. And so I think that we would all agree that, this is the moment maybe for Central Asia to, and a lot had been done already, but still this is the moment that we should probably support the project of greater integration, greater cooperation in Central Asia.
All right.
I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aya. I mean, thank you for this very rich presentation. As you certainly understood, I mean, there is a lot in this report. That's why I really encourage you to read it as soon as it's published. And I just wanted to specify that we will send an announcement in the coming days when this report will be published. We'll send an announcement on our mailing list so that, again, you can download it from our website. So our second speaker will be Ms. Margarita Asienova, who is a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C., and a regular contributor to its flagship publication, Eurasia Daily Monitor, covering energy security and politics in Europe and in Eurasia. She served as the Advanced Area Studies Chair for Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia at the Foreign Service Institute, U.S. Department of State, for over 2 decades. Margarita is a recipient of the John Knight Professional Journalism Fellowship at Stanford University for her reporting on nationalism in the Balkans. Her books include Eurasia Disunion, Russia's Vulnerable Flanks with Janusz Bugajski at the Jamestown, published by the Jamestown Foundation in 2016, which is a critical study on Russian subversion in Europe, Eurasia and Central Asia. And she also published Azerbaijan and the New Energy of Geopolitics of Southeastern Europe, which was also published by the Jamestown Foundation in 2015. Margarita, thank you so much for being with us today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me here today. The regional cooperation in Central Asia is a topic that I've been interested for a long time and observing it both from theoretical point of view and practical point of view. What is happening? When I first started traveling to Central Asia, I saw a region that was just after 9/11. I saw a region that was completely divided. Every country was trying to build their own economy, their own national identity. They tried to distinguish from the neighbors. They tried to be a state. And it wasn't an easy process. It's not an easy to be a young state and to start from scratch, building institutions, building security arrangements, and building a nation, defining what your nation is, and then reforming an economy that was completely collapsed at the time. In the 90s, there was a boom from commodity selling, of course. But let's remember when the regional cooperation idea was born. It was in 89. In February 89, when the 5 prime ministers of the Central Asian countries went to Dushanbe after an earthquake the previous month, and the help of all Central Asian neighbors to Tajikistan at the time. They decided that they need to work together to develop their economies on a different principle. Because the Soviet economy was collapsing, they had to figure out how to be able to sell their own resources, not through Moscow and not on prices determined by the bureaucracy in Moscow, but to have part of it retained for themselves, sold internationally, making the money that that Moscow was making at the time, and nothing was coming back to the regions. They also needed to develop their own production, because as most of the countries in Central Asia were exporting to other parts of the Soviet Union, they had to import everything, from toilet paper to clothing to textile to everyday goods that they were importing, not really at the best price for their people. So they wanted more protections for their own workers. They wanted more independence. They actually wanted, that was the first time stated, not as clearly, but behind the lines you can read, they wanted control of their own resources. And when this control came in 91, they were still completely caught in each other's dependence, because they couldn't disconnect immediately from Russia, from the rest of the Soviet Union. Regardless of independence, economically, they were still very much tied. And that was the challenge for them. I think this is the time when each of the newly independent states, one of the youngest states in the world at the time and still, started focusing on their own priorities and their own economies. And some of them went through violence, like Tajikistan. So it wasn't really an easy period for regional cooperation. There were several leaders that were promoting several regional cooperation. One was the most adamant one was Nursultan Nazarbayev, for a very obvious reason. He was very interested in ecological protection of the ROC, of the lands and other resources of Central Asia, as well as controlling their own economies and developing them. So he preferred to have trading relations and mutual development relations with the neighboring countries rather than with the center, with Moscow. He continued insisting on this cooperation for many years, and he was successful in many aspects with the leaders of other countries. But at the time, Islam Karimov of Uzbekistan was the unpredictable personality in this effort. He would agree with something for a time, then he would change his mind. Projects would start, they would stop, there would be hope, and then there would be a complete breaking down of any initiative. So it wasn't easy until Mirziyoyev came to power and opened up those possibilities for the countries. But let's remember this time. We had mined border between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. We had clashes on an ethnic basis in the Fergana Valley between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz. We had, before that, pogroms against the Meskhetian Turks. There was a situation in which cooperation was almost impossible. Turkmenistan was completely closed at the time, did not want to really participate in any regional establishments. But I would say all these developments were very much dependent on what was happening in Russia. And when we had powerful Russia, as Aytulkun said, leading the countries to follow, investing millions in Kyrgyzstan and in the Tajikistan, and promising security to border areas with Afghanistan and so on, then that cooperation, so to speak, was working, but not really among the countries of Central Asia, but mostly with Russia. And I am really grateful to Aytulkun for writing this wonderful report and making this connection to the past, to the beautiful past of Central Asia. Because Central Asia was the region the Caspian region and Central Asia that domesticated the horse, the first transportation vehicles in the world that changed completely how the world was operating later on. Central Asia was the one that became the heart of the Silk Roads that are vital for the countries, not only in Central Asia, but China, Russia, you name it, all the neighbors are using those roads to connect to Europe. Before the maritime transportation was introduced, the Silk Roads were the main trade corridors for the region. And it's very important to remember that, to remember the common past and to see what is in the future. When I said it's interesting how things depend on what's happening in Russia. In 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and started the war in the Donbass, the Eurasian Economic Union stopped enlarging. It just stopped right there. Tajikistan refused to join it. The countries that are there are 6 countries, and that's what's going to stay. These are Armenia and Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Russia, the main countries. So they're 5 countries, right?
Yeah.
They're only 5 countries. We're talking about a union here, but it's not a real union. It's only a formation of 5 countries. The same with the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Russia tries to present it as the NATO of Eurasia. No, it's not. It's 5 members, and it's not going to grow. So what Russia does, it has a political impact on what the countries in Central Asia do. They just stopped considering the Eurasian Union as their main vehicle for trade and economic relations. Whatever exists and is used at the moment, Russia needs a lot of goods. They are coming from Central Asia, many of them. Through the Eurasian Economic Union, they have better conditions to do that, some regulation at least of trade, but it's not going to expand, it's not going to grow. And when in 2022 Russia attacked Ukraine, that was also a scary moment for Central Asian countries that have been colonized, some by the Russian Empire earlier, others were oppressed for decades under the Soviets. Their population suffered. Their languages were forgotten. In many schools were closed. The young people had to operate in Russian mostly and then relearn their own language later. So it wasn't a happy memory. And when Russia becomes aggressive, this happy memory just goes down the drain. It's not possible for them to dream of a better future, prosperous future, when they are dealing with a country that is an aggressor and can threaten them at any point. They don't know that. So the relations with Russia may have increased in terms of trade because of the needs of Russia at the moment, under sanctions by Europe and by the United States and by other countries in Asia and around the world. But this is not going to build more trust and more opportunities for development between Russia and Central Asians. And this is why, as Ertuğrul says, this is the moment for regional cooperation. The region is growing in geopolitical importance precisely because it's located between Russia and China. Both are considered by the United States as either geopolitical rivals or an aggressive new imperialistic power in the case of Russia. Both are the last remaining empires in the world. So it's this region that is secular, trying to build market economies and trying to build politically developed societies and more democratic societies, is caught between these 2 powers, and it needs to get out of this embrace and be balanced by more relations with the West. And the alternative to the region is, of course, trade with Europe, trade with the Middle East, trade with Asian continent. A lot of these roads are the old Silk Roads. The Middle Corridor is a replica of the old Silk Roads. It goes through the Caspian Sea, of course, not around it as in the past, but But the immense development of this middle corridor in the last several years is a testament that the region is trying to diversify trade, to diversify dependence on Russia and China, and to find its own way to secure prosperity for their own population. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margarita. Our third speaker will be Mr. Wesley Alexander Hill, who is Assistant Director and Lead Analyst for the Energy Growth and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center. Dr. Hill is an expert on grant strategy, geoeconomics, and international relations with a regional specialization in China, Eurasia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Wesley has unique expertise in Chinese influence in Central Asia and Sino-American energy competition, and he has made media appearances and has been published in Al Jazeera, BBC, Forbes, New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy, Newsmax, Newsweek, The Hill, The National Interest, the Atlantic Council, Voice of America, and more. So Wesley, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Is that good?
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I'll try to not disappoint the audience, both in the room and online. So there was two dynamics that really inspired us to tackle the issues that we have alluded to so far. So first, there is a new administration here in Washington, D.C. that has a very different view of what American diplomacy involves and the utility of multilateralism. So prior to the Trump administration, the American policy in Central Asia was rather unfocused, and it really only came into focus towards the end of the Obama administration, also the first Trump administration, but it really only solidified under the Biden administration. So at first, policy was unfocused. To the extent there was policy, there was a lot of concern about Afghanistan, naturally, and there was a lot of concern about Russia and China, but it was not taken systematically. It was only with the emergence of the C5 format across multiple different sectors. Now the C5 format with all 5 Central Asian states as one unit interacting with the United States of America, that went from itself a sort of novelty to now it's routine. There's the business 5 plus 1. There is the green 5 plus 1. If you can think of a policy initiative, Central Asia is working on it integration, and it is working as a collective group in its interactions with the United States. Why is this so important now? Well, at precisely the moment where this sort of interaction with the United States is becoming institutionalized. So, for example, the first time a leader of the United States met with all 5 Central Asian leaders at once was when Joe Biden met with the C5 leaders on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. So at precisely the moment that Central Asian integration was really becoming consolidated as a part of its routine foreign policy, it seems like the United States is less interested in that. The Trump administration has expressed a pretty open skepticism towards a lot of multilateral institutions, a lot of multilateral vehicles and mechanisms. So that's really the first thing that really inspired this report. Concurrently to this, there was the second dynamic that really inspired this report and really compelled us to move forward with it was China. So as the other panelists have already mentioned, Chinese influence in Central Asia goes very deep, but there are a couple of ways of thinking about this influence that I would encourage you all to remember, and if you want, you can follow along. So take a map of any Chinese dynasty you can think of throughout history. What happens, and you can follow this territorial evolution with startling predictability, is the core of China is consolidated. All of the big Chinese cities you've heard of are consolidated. And the first point of regional expansion does not involve the other parts of China you probably think of, Inner Mongolia, Manchuria, Tibet. It involves a long march westwards down what we call the Silk Road through modern-day Xinjiang into modern-day Central Asia. That's why when you ask most people in the West and you tell them to describe the Silk Road, they'll say, oh yeah, it was a trade route, you know, glass and stuff went down the Silk Road and we got silk and it got to Rome, and sometimes there were monks involved smuggling things. But if you ask people in Central Asia and you ask the Chinese what the dynamics of the Silk Road are, they'll give you a very different answer. They'll say, well, it was a series of fortified military outposts that allowed Chinese dynasties and political entities to control trade in various ways that were advantageous to whatever proximate political objectives were being pursued. This is important to note because this is actually the most common economic modality we see throughout Central Asian history, going back 2,000 years, when the first major Chinese war fought in Central Asia was fought between the Han Dynasty and successor states of Alexander the Great's empire, called the War of Heavenly Horses. Russian intervention and Russian expansion into the scene is historically a much more recent phenomenon, starting in the early 1800s and then continuing on from there. So the resurgence of Chinese influence in Central Asia is really a return to a core economic phenomenon that we've seen going back 2,000 years. So this intersection of a new political administration, a new modality of American diplomacy, interacting with a resurgence of a pretty old economic phenomenon and an old economic and diplomatic way of acting from the Chinese, is what inspired this report. And I think it's this intersection between these two that is so important from the American perspective. So what does this all mean for American diplomacy and American policy in the region? So the first thing that I would say, and then we go into this in great detail in the report, is that American diplomacy with the region and interactions with the region should continue to emphasize multilateral mechanisms, even if there isn't as much political appetite for interacting through these mechanisms in the United States. What this means on our part is that we don't have to view this as sort of a regional integration or state building project like we viewed it in the past. So wind the clock back 15, 20 years, there was a vague notion in Washington, D.C. that Central Asian integration, oh, there's too many challenges, it's not going to happen. Sure, you have, as we mentioned, we have visionary people like, the first president of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev, talking about integration. But then you have other people who may, Islam Karimov in Uzbekistan. There are too many people against integration. This has to be an outside project. Why do we want this as the United States to happen? Well, it's if we have a more unified economic bloc, a more unified political bloc, it is more able to resist Russia and China. It is able to resist the divide and conquer strategy that we see so many times throughout history. What I would encourage the new administration is to drop that attitude, not because regional integration is not important or not because it won't make them more economically sovereign and able to resist Chinese and Russian pressure, but because I think we're at the point, and the report makes this quite clear, that the local endogenous pressures for regional integration are strong and they are moving forward. And this has been a process that's been happening over the course of decades. So going back to the early 1990s, when you had the first forays into regional integration and concurrent to state building in Central Asia out of the debris of Soviet rule, lessons were learned. It wasn't like as if all these experiments failed and then, oh, they were forgotten about, we'll never revisit them again. So what we're seeing now is a resurgence in commitment to state building activities, these regional integration bodies and initiatives that as a whole are drawing on these past lessons, and they're drawing on past failures, and they're moving forward more concretely, more successfully. So for American policy, this really means that we don't have to do as much as we thought we had to do in the past in order to realize what is America's core objective in the region. And America's core objective in the region is promoting this regional integration so that you have a unified bloc that is less susceptible to Russian or Chinese coercion. This is very important to note because we're entering a very transactional phase transactional phase in American diplomacy, to put it diplomatically. So there are pretty open and I think somewhat alarming tendencies from people in the current administration, but also people in academia that say, well, as a part of some deal with Russia or China, maybe we should be willing to barter away certain things all over the globe, or, ask for things and elsewhere. And inevitably, because this is a region that is between Russia and China, and also very close to other geopolitical hotspots, Iran, Afghanistan, the Middle East, etc., I could go on. There are some people who wish to sort of, barter away Central Asia to the degree that, anything could be bartered away. And that is usually advocates for less American involvement, less American trade, etc. Maybe less investment on the middle corridor. And I think that's something that our report makes quite clear, is that this is a mistake, and it's also not in America's core interests going forward. So America doesn't have to take ownership of this project because it's not an American project. It was a local project. It's been a local project for many years now. To the degree that America was influential, it was only to act as a endpoint for various commodities, to act as a focus for attracting foreign direct investment. So going back to really the 1990s, Central Asian states sought foreign investment and Western investment, especially as a means of counterbalancing Chinese and Russian investment. So throughout every sector you can think of, from then until now, economic, financial, diplomatic, geopolitical, we are seeing the necessity of American involvement decline, but we are seeing local involvement and investment and capacity increase. So this is really the time for people in Washington, D.C., and I'd encourage the people, down the street at Foggy Bottom, hopefully some of which are watching this or have been sent this after the fact, maybe by me, to remember that we don't, just because we're not taking ownership of something, doesn't mean that it's not important, and it doesn't mean it's not in America's interests. And I think at least that is something that people in the current administration would be willing to get on board with. So I will conclude with a logistical note about this project. We have been addressing this issue of Central Asian integration from multiple different angles. We just talked about this to an extent involving nuclear energy and energy in general at the International Institute of Strategic Studies in Paris, France. That report is also available if you go to iticnet.org. And we are also talking about this in forthcoming events in London at the Royal United Services Institute, and Stockholm at the Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute. I mention this not just because it's obligatory self-promotion, but because this is an important issue that has many vectors of analysis and engagement. And this is the only region in the world which is bordered by both America's two primary geopolitical adversaries, Russia and China. Nearby, you have Iran, and of course, little bit further afield, you have a very potent potential American ally, India. So that is all that I will say logistically. If you need any of these reports, please see the links that should be forthcoming in the coming days. And I think we still have some time for question and answers. So I'll hand it back to Sebastian.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to turn the computer on the three of you if we can. Let's do that. So yes, we thank you, Wesley, for your presentation, for your comments, and indeed we have about 15 minutes for discussion. So maybe I'm going to open the floor now to our room, and then I'll move to our online audience. So yeah, let's go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Alex Sanchez, I'm an analyst here in DC. We've talked about the United States, China, and Russia, but it's another actor that has a growing presence in Central Asia, not just currently, but also historically, Turkey. Just last week, there was an informal summit of heads of state of the Organization of Turkic States in Budapest. The Budapest Declaration was signed, in which, to your point, I told him, the President Tokayev called for a joint modernization of transport corridors and border procedures, and implementation of large-scale infrastructure initiatives like the North-South Corridor. So what do you think of this pan-Turkic initiative. Tajikistan will not be involved in it, but what do you think about Turkey using its history, its cultural links with Central Asia and the Caucasus, its presence, its influence, but also how much can Central Asian countries, I think like Tajikistan, can benefit from these projects that the OTS is trying to carry out?
So who wants to answer?
Yeah, I can
yeah.
just add a few points. Yeah, I think that, of course, Turkey is a very major actor and a very important partner for Central Asia. And as you said, it's not only the Turkic past. I mean, it's also because Turkey is a country that is geographically located, that is very, very kind of convenient for Central Asia. And it plays a big role in many transportation projects again. So I think that it's less about that this is a kind of pan-Turkism project. And I think that Turkey itself is not really promoting that as such because it is a little bit divisive. It has some kind of bad connotations in the past. And generally, I think that Turkey, I mean, the level of cooperation of the whole Central Asia countries with Turkey is actually at a very good place. And Turkey was the first country that also recognized the independence of the Central Asian countries, as you know. And I think a lot will be dependent on how these transportation projects will be implemented. But again, I think the transportation is key. Economics is also very important. Trade is also important. There are some certain limitations of Turkey's economy. I mean, it's not so powerful as, for example, a foreign investor in the countries of Central Asia. But it's still, I mean, it's a great cooperation, and I think it's also, putting aside some of the historical kind of disagreements on this whole kind of Tajik and Turkic unity, I think that if, focusing on really practical and geographical transportation advantages, I think that that would be very beneficial for the cooperation in Central Asia.
I would add a small addendum to that. So historically speaking, at least in the last 35 years, Turkish influence in Central Asia politically has been far less than its economic reach would suggest. So it is absolutely true that Turkey is very vital, both directly and indirectly through Azerbaijan for trade, commerce, to a far lesser extent, foreign direct investment, acting as sort of a middleman for many different Western companies, etc. But its political leverage and its work with the Organization of Turkic States has really fallen far short of at least Turkish expectations. So when, quite famously, big diplomatic blunder, it recognized all of these Central Asian states literally the same day they declared independence, immediately sent diplomatic representatives. They couldn't find anybody in Turkey at the time that spoke Uzbek well enough to actually interact with the official Uzbek government officials, and they had to borrow somebody from the still technically existent Soviet ministry to translate that, was in the process of collapsing. And I don't mention this because it's a funny story. I mention this because it's a little indicative of what Turkish interactions have been like, and then they've been in the right direction, but they have tend to overreach, and there's a lot of aspirationalism that hasn't been backed up through a lot of mechanisms. So the Organization of Turkic States, I think, is moving in the right direction, but we should also acknowledge that it's new. There's a reason why it went from the Turkic Council to the Organization of Turkic States. It rebranded because the Turkic Council wasn't doing much of anything. And I think we'll see in the next few years how well it does. And I think it will be judged by its ability to facilitate trade through the Middle Corridor, across the Caspian, and then onto the west via Azerbaijan and beyond.
I think it's Turkey's second chance in Central Asia. It missed its first chance in the 90s. Investment was not sufficient. Political influence or any kind of diplomatic influence was limited. It had a really great expectations. It raised great expectations in Central Asia, but that was not fulfilled. Well, now it's the second chance. And after proving very beneficial cooperation partnership with Azerbaijan on oil and gas through the Southern Gas Corridor, Baku-Ceyhan-Tbilisi pipeline, and that helped the development of the Caspian Corridor as well. Turkey is now connecting all these regions from Central Asia, from the east of Central Asia to the west to the Caspian, through the Caucasus and to Turkey and Europe. So it's becoming an incredibly important bridge for both regions, the Caspian and Central Asia, and it is fulfilling that role, at least in terms of cooperation. And we see now so many meetings between the leaders of Turkey, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan together, that gives hope that whether organization through the Organization of Turkic States or through bilateral and regional links, this cooperation is going to prove beneficial in terms of economic development and transportation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take maybe one more question from our room here, and then I will move to our online audience. Yes, please.
Very interesting presentation. I'm especially interested in security cooperation. What do you think about security cooperation? What are the potential outside of CSTO?
I'll take a crack at this because it's sort of a hobby horse of mine too. So the security cooperation really in Central Asia until now has focused a lot on internal security. So there was a lot of cooperation with interior ministries. A lot of security personnel went to Moscow to get training. Now a lot of that, according to a report actually released, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, by the FBI Statistical Office, that most Central Asian policemen and police sergeants of those kind are now evenly split in between China and the United States. So a couple of months ago, the FBI actually held like a very big training session and a big local policy coordination event in Dushanbe, and this was a comparatively new development because prior to the war in Ukraine, there was sort of this underlying assumption that responsibilities and influence in Central Asia would be demarcated. Russia will do security things, China will do economic things, the West will do foreign direct investment, and then maybe some cultural ties, educational exchanges, etc. But the war in Ukraine has jumbled this paradigm, and it has made it unrecognizable to the point that it's almost pointless to talk about any demarcation based on national lines. And in security cooperation, what we're seeing is, there was the January intervention right before the war in Ukraine began. And then after that, there hasn't really been that much security cooperation involving Russia. China doesn't seem to be eager to get involved in the region. And there is not really an American appetite to get involved in the region either, especially after the retreat from Afghanistan. So what this means is there is plenty of, again, local impetus. Sorry to go back to my earlier point too much, but there's local impetus for regionalized security cooperation. And in terms of military hardware and acquisitions, we're seeing that there is a limited degree of synchronicity. So Kazakhstan has a new APC, that armored personnel carrier, that Uzbekistan has been interested in buying and has bought a couple. It's based off of a German model. There were a couple of times in the last couple of years since 2022 that they have coordinated military purchases, etc. So that's all very nascent. There's not an emerging defense council or anything like that we saw in the 1990s. But I think there are encouraging signs of more regionalized security cooperation, both military and internal security.
In the Caspian Sea as well, we see Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan Navy cooperation, especially since the lake has been perceived as controlled by Russia and Iran. So the military forces of the Central Asian region have a lot of development to do, of course. That is entirely a different process. They cannot rely on Russia for sure. They are wary of Russia. So this is going to be the next thing to watch, how the security arrangements of Central Asia are going to develop.
All right, thank you. So I would like to be fair with our online audience, and because I received many questions, let me ask for the first one that I move back to the room. So the first one is that there have been, of course, many positive developments when it comes to regional cooperation, but there are still many obstacles, including in terms of security, in terms of infrastructure, but also water scarcity, relations with Afghanistan. So the question is, do you see that there is enough political will and technical knowledge among the Central Asian elites to address also difficult issues and turn them into opportunities for regional cooperation quickly enough to have an impact in the world that is changing so fast?
Yeah, you want me to answer? Yeah, I mean, political will is something that we've been talking in this report, that I think that we have it, most definitely, that this is the process that had started from the above, and we have the elites in Central Asia, and all the presidents are kind of understanding the fabric of the regional cooperation that is really very important to develop. But as for the technical expertise, I think we need a lot of assistance in this regard, because we have the idea, and this idea has been there for centuries, but we don't know how to implement it. And there are many discussions in Central Asia. We'll look at the examples of the European Union, of ASEAN, of different other blocs, but nothing really seems to work, because Central Asia is really unique. And I don't think that there is another region in the world that has this kind of characteristics. And so I think that technical expertise is definitely needed, especially in the transportation, logistical kind of thing, how to build roads, how to set up the system, especially the fast delivery kind of system and things like that, the harmonization of the tariffs and how to make it digital, how to apply the newest technology and so on. So I think that definitely the international assistance in this regard would be very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe a question again from our online audience, and I guess it's probably going to be for Wesley. Is there any potential for Central Asian states to build out their industrial plants, including, for example, rare earth element? I know that you work a lot on there. So including rare earth elements refinement as pressure on China continues and their demographics fell.
So I just published an article that might give away my answer, but I asked, is Kazakhstan the Saudi Arabia of critical minerals? And unsurprisingly, because I bothered to write and publish the article, the answer is yes. So the role of China right now in the international critical minerals chain is that it has a monopoly, but this monopoly is in refining. The American strategy to address this could go one of two ways, and there is a lot of debate on which way is better. One way is you build up refining capacity and you directly compete with China. That's a big ask for a country that does not like a lot of industrial policy, does not have a history of, state-owned enterprises or directives like that. The other way is that you increase the production of minerals to such a degree that capacity cannot be absorbed by China, and this increases the incentives for other actors, either inside or outside the United States, to develop their own refining capacity. So in this strategy, it's less important that refining capacity is developed in the United States, more so that it's developed in any place that isn't China. So the reason why I mention that, and I take it back to Central Asia, is that if the United States chooses the second model, and every indication I've seen thinks that we're more likely to pick that model of competition with China in the critical minerals field, then Central Asia plays a very integral role in this, because should more Central Asian rare earth mineral capacity come online, whether or not it's made exclusively available to the United States is another question. It is likely to push prices down to a degree that, one, you're going to have local incentives for refining capacity to be developed, and two, you're going to see this start to chip away at the Chinese international monopoly on critical mineral refining. the United States is already interested in the region and already doing this. So we signed memorandums of understanding that were subsequently upgraded, I think, in the last month to cooperation agreements with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Kazakhstan in particular has a lot of mining expertise and human capital in mining. It is the largest producer of uranium in the world, and it is one of the largest producer of a whole other host of critical minerals. There's 44 in total. I won't bother everybody by going down the USGS list. Suffice to say that there's plenty of capital, and this is a region that is open for investment now, compared with, say, a lot of the critical mineral agreements that are getting a lot of attention, like in Ukraine. Recently, there was a proposal for using a similar critical mineral agreement to end the fighting in the Congo, between Congo and Rwandan forces and various non-state actors. Whereas Kazakhstan, you could just invest now, and the money would come out whenever you get the mine operational. It's not contingent upon a political solution involving Russia or non-state actors in the Eastern Congo. So I think that Central Asia is extremely important from a variety of ways of addressing China's rare earth minerals monopoly.
Thank you, Wesley. We'll need, unfortunately, to conclude very soon, but I'd like to give our audience here one more in our room, one more chance to ask a question. Any question in the room? Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to see your reports getting published. My question is, since I'm a graduate student and also doing this summer internship with Asian Development Bank, so I'm asking the question from the angles of like ADB, because Alexander, like earlier, mentioned about the skepticism of US government towards multilateral organization. So how is the role of ADB, like how it has been in Central Asia, or like how its role can be in the future as a multilateral organization beyond financing? I just wanted to understand regional cooperation gains momentum in Central Asia. What
And if you don't mind, we're going to take the second question because we really need to conclude after that. Yes, so you had a question, right?
Yes, I was going to ask, you mentioned local pressures towards integration. How long, or do you think it's possible that we could, at any point in the far future, see anything resembling a European Union, but a Central Asian Union? And if so, how long do you think that would take? How far in the future is that?
Could you just rephrase the questions for online out?
So the first question was on the ADB. What could be, the role of the ADB in our, I guess, supporting regionalism. And I'm so sorry, sir. I was reading all the questions while you were speaking, so I didn't listen to your second one. Can you come maybe closer?
The second one is whether we can expect a political union in Central Asia anytime soon. Let me start with the second one.
Go ahead, Margarita.
Okay. I don't think that there will be a political union in Central Asia. Just looking at the region, probably we don't even realize that it's as big as Europe. And it has only 5 countries. And the logic is, the logical outcome would be, well, let's do a federation, let's do a confederation, or let's work within a Central Asia Union to implement all these 26 agreements that were signed 3 years ago by all 5 heads of state, because they do want to work on regional integration, especially in the light of Russia's war against Ukraine. That was the driver. The deepening cooperation was, to a large extent, incited by the war against Ukraine. But I don't see it happening because of many political differences. Even in the European Union, we had to wait for some countries to walk their way to a political maturity and economic maturity before they joined the European Union. You have to have a more or less even level of these processes that have to be brought to a certain point. And we could have expected Central Asia would be at the level of Eastern Europe by now. But we always forget these were really new states. They have memory of being states, being khanates, being federations in the past, but not a contemporary modern state. They are now building their states the way Europe was building the states back in the 18th, 19th century, as nation states first, or as a consolidated nation of people of one territory. To expect that this is going to be brought to political maturity for a union, I think it's premature, but maybe in 20, 30, 40 years, we could expect such process happening.
Thank you. On the ADB, or do you want to add anything on that, Aya?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, yeah, I also agree that probably political union is something too early to think about, but I also agree that some federation, confederation, some kind of flexible arrangement is actually possible. And I think that, again, for all these agreements, for all these transportation challenges, for all these economic challenges, we do need some kind of a comprehensive agreement between all the countries to be signed. This is not exactly maybe something like a, some kind of founding agreement, but I think that's something that can happen pretty soon, because otherwise there is no way to move forward. And for the ADB, I mean, I just want to add a little bit that ADB is really a very helpful organization, especially in technical expertise and financial assistance. There is a Carrick Institute also financed by ADB. I mean, they do a lot on Central Asia. They do a lot on those technical areas that I don't think that we I've seen many other actors doing. For example, I don't know if there are any Russian funded, for example, research centers, or, that can do the same work. So yeah, I think ADB is really important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say on the ADB that I think a lot of the ADB's role in terms of what it's investing in and what it continues to do, I don't anticipate that changing a lot, but I would say that it's probably more geopolitically conscious than a lot of people realize. In May 2023, when you had the ASEAN summit between the 5 Central Asian leaders and Xi Jinping, excuse me, you had a lot of projects promised that were moved forward when they were profitable and politically acceptable, but you had projects that were rolled back when they were politically unacceptable. So there is tremendous local skepticism towards Chinese influence and Chinese investment because of a history of interactions going back throughout time that have, various levels of contention. And sometimes these manifest in understandable ways. Sometimes they're rather unpredictable. And local elites are very conscious of this. They don't want to generate backlash against what they see as vital foreign direct investment. So I would say that if you want to see where the ADB is going, don't look so much at whether any given project is profitable or not. Think of that as a precondition. More look at the geopolitical realities and the necessity of avoiding backlash, because since the ASEAN summit in 2023, that is what has been a pretty reliable predictor of what the ADB and other East Asian institutions are doing in the region.
Thank you. I mean, I know we're very late, but I just would like, the last question, to bring maybe a more social dimension in our discussion today. And I was wondering, how do you feel that civil society factor, in this regional integration process? I mean, to what extent is it involved in a regionalism effort? And have you seen any, let's say, meaningful cross-border initiatives by non-state actors? I'm thinking about NGOs, but not only NGOs, for example, about academic circles or youth organizations that complement or even sometimes challenge this state-led regionalism.
Yeah, I think that actually, many NGOs and many, civil society actors in Central Asia, they get funding often from the international organizations, and international organizations, they usually provide this funding on a regional basis. So there are many projects that are really regionalized, in their core. So we have, for example, some maybe, I don't know, the funds from the UN, from some American actors, but they're all for Central Asia. And that's why I think the Central Asian civil society is actually more integrated with each other rather than anybody else. And especially the youth, there are always, things like different Central Asian summits for youth and for different NGO actors. I mean, of course, there are separate projects and more kind of country-based projects, but a lot because the international actors provided the regional-based projects. I think this kind of influenced the interaction.
Anyone wants to add final?
Yeah, I'll add a fun fact that really reinforces everything that Aytolkin just said, and that is if you look at the per capita movement of students that go study abroad, Kazakhstan is one of the highest in the world in terms of percentage. And the reason why it's so high is because starting in the 1990s, during the Nazarbayev presidency, they launched a lot of initiatives, including the Bolashak Fellows Program, some of whom are at this institution and, hope maybe some are in this room with us right now, to study abroad or to build networks abroad. Because it was seen not only as an investment in the human capital of the nation, but it was also seen as a way of building connections with the West for all of the political and economic reasons one would imagine. But this has also had the side effect, unintended or otherwise, of increasing the civil society's appetite for regional integration. Because if you send so many millions of people abroad as a conscious strategy, they are naturally going to absorb some of those ideas when they come back and live their lives and study whatever they're studying and doing.
Absolutely right. In addition to that, there are several English language instruction universities that have developed in Central Asia that are attracting students from the region. The American University in Kyrgyzstan is one of them. Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. In Almaty, there are a couple of universities that are also English language instruction, and this is allowing the students from different countries to come and study in a common language in a neighboring country, learning a lot about the neighboring country. And in terms of NGOs, I have to tell you from experience in Central Asia, working with non-profit groups, human rights groups, the activists know each other by name. There's a wide network. They can connect you with anyone from any country, the journalists as well, regionally, the academics as well. And Ertuğrul is absolutely right. Civil society and the academic circles are already integrated in Central Asia. The politicians and the corporations need to follow.
All right, thank you. I'm really sorry we're late. We really need to conclude. So I would really like to thank all our three speakers for their very insightful presentations. I would like to thank our in-person and online audience for the discussion, for the question. I apologize. There were many other questions that we couldn't address, but I'm sure this means that, well, we have to organize another event. No doubt about that. I would like also to thank again Dr. Cohen, Dr. Hill, and Mr. Buckley for really their cooperation, their collaboration, and their support. On a more personal note, as Aytolkin was saying, she was working with us, and I would say that first I would like to thank you, Aytolkin, for your outstanding report and your efficiency, your legendary efficiency to prepare this report. And I would say that we have Aytolkin is much more than the author of the report. She used to work with us. She's a friend, and we're really missing you, and we look forward to having you again here. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to having you again in our career. Thank you.